I remember some of it. How about you? Do you remember it?
I think they ought to make the first day of summer the day that time changes. Wasn't that the line?
I think that was it. And Johnny, in his articulate way, said, what?
That's good. That's testosterone again. Very articulate.
We're coming back on the air after an interruption due to technical problems.
Nothing wrong with the radio. Must have been the station.
Which row is it in?
We had some wonderful film noir type shots. Do you remember?
Absolutely. Well, they were scattered throughout all over, but I think you have one in particular.
Oh, I do. I do. At the very beginning, in fact, when we were coming into the cemetery, remember the old cemetery sign shaped like a diamond? It had cemetery on it. It was riddled with bullet holes.
Used to be just down over the hill, just behind that building down there, as in the main entrance. Yeah.
I was asked to audition for Night of the Living Dead by Carl Hardman. I was not in Pittsburgh at the time. I knew in my soul I needed to go to California. When I was in 4th grade, I knew that was the place I was going to live. When I was late teens, early 20s, off I went with a little pack on my back out to Hollywood to make it big in film. I had been there a short while when Carl called. He said, "We're going to make a movie. Why don't you come on back and audition?" Packed up my little bag, went back to my hometown of Pittsburgh, auditioned for the film. The rest is history, if you will. I got the role of Barbara. It changed my life.
Well, it's, you know, there actually was nothing wrong with the radio. It was the station.
Yes. All the exposition that was set up, whether it was a shot of your glove or it was a shot of the radio and the static, it all added to the storyline, didn't it?
Absolutely. All those little insert shots led up to, well, here we are back here 40 years later.
And isn't this where you put the wreath?
This was the wreath that we drove all the way from the city to put it out here.
That's right.
I wonder what happened to the one from last year. Each year we spend good money on these things. We come out here and the one from last year's gone.
Well, the flowers die, and the caretaker or somebody takes them away.
Shooting the film was broken up into segments. We shot all summer, then there was an hiatus. We came back in the fall. To be honest with you, I never got frustrated with that. It was really a part of the process. That's a part of filmmaking. Keep in mind, too, I was a young actress who really didn't have experience under her belt, many films to draw from. This was new, it was exciting, it's where I wanted to be. Anything that came my way, whether it was long hours, whether it was waiting 2 months to go back and readdress a scene that was already done, didn't bother me. I loved doing it. The whole process, though long and arduous, was exciting. It was fun.
We were riding in the cemetery, Johnny and me. Johnny. We came to put a wreath on my father's grave. Johnny.
Barbara became on the screen, or as we shot, her character grew from all our little side discussions. What George pictured, what was happening at the moment. Barbara evolved every time we shot a scene. she was not created prior to coming into the shooting of the film.
Oh, I'd like to leave. Yes.
When I was 23 years old, and really not knowing the whole story from beginning to end, how George was picturing Night of the Living Dead to unfold, I took Barbara, as I said, a scene at a time. I think Barbara had to do what she did. She had to go inside to figure out how to deal with something that was so horrendous that had never happened before. I like what she did. There were some people who might grab a grenade or an Uzi and shoot everybody up on the spot. Barbara wasn't that kind of a gal. She had to think about it. She had to find herself again and then come back on force. I love that about her. I would like to think that a good part of Judith is like that too, especially today.
For me, it's quite touching to be here with you, back in this very same spot, and I know for sure I never had any inkling that 40 years after the fact we would be standing here with a film crew talking about our work 40 years earlier.
None at all. But I can tell you this, I'm extremely grateful it's happened that way.
You still here, Bill?
Yeah, Chief, we're going to stay with it till we meet up with the National Guard.
Where'd you get the coffee?
One of the volunteers, you're doing all the work, you take it.
Thank you.
I was doing chiller theater, and it was very popular in the tri-state area. Carl Hardman, a local producer with a recording studio, called me a couple of times and said, Bill, we'd like to do a horror film, Night of the Living Dead. We'd like to have you make a guest appearance. I said, I really don't have time, Carl. I appreciate it very much. And he said, Bill, we won't keep you long. We'll do it Sunday morning. You be there by, what time? I said, well, we'll go out for breakfast. I get off about 3 or 3:30 on the air. And I said, we'll go to the set. Well, we go up to Evans City, get there about 7 o'clock, and the sun's coming up. And I'm sitting around and sitting around and sitting around and sitting around. I didn't know the movies, how they worked. And about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, George came over, introduced himself, and also Russ Streiner. And they said, we're ready. Now, in the meantime, I've been up since Saturday. It's about 7 a.m., you know. It's a Sunday at 4 p.m. So we went over. I had a cameraman named Steve Hutzko from Channel 11. So we went through our scene and did it. And then we took some film of the background, and I presented it on Chiller Theater the following week. Not my bit, but I said, well, they're making a movie called Night of the Living Dead. So that's when I started to promote Night of the Living Dead, even before it came out, or before they were finished with it.
All right, Steve, tell them we're going to stay with it, and everything appears to be under control.
I'm glad that I'm considered part of the Night of the Living Dead group. Thanks for everything. And as one of my heroes, Bob Hope, used to say and sing, thanks for the memories.
This is Bill Cardill, WIC TV 11 News.
Makes the scene delicious.
I never thought I could make films. I never thought I could make a movie. I wanted to.
And I tried. My uncle, this same rich uncle that endowed us later on to, you know, buy the first equipment that enabled us to start our company. Wonderful, benevolent guy, Monroe, had an 8mm camera when I was a kid. I must have been 12 years old or something, and so he didn't know how to use it. He never figured out how to use his movie camera. He had enough money that he was one of those guys that bought it and said, hey, I bought a movie camera. I don't know how to use it. I figured out how to use it. And then he would buy me reels of 8mm film. And so I would go out and, you know, try to shoot things. I actually shot a couple of little things that I thought were feature films. Of course, they were little garbagey things, but they had an attempt at narrative. And, but I never thought I could do it professionally, never. So when I went to college, I went to study painting and design because that's what my dad was, a commercial artist. So that's what I went to study. And still never thought of it as a career. It was just a love that I had. I loved movies for as long as I could remember. So my family sends me to college. My mom and dad drive me to Pittsburgh. So I go my first day, freshman, and you know, they put these dinks on you, which are like yarmulkes, and they stick them on you, which identifies you as a freshman. So there's this guy standing in front of me. We happen to be adjacent in line. My name's Romero, his name is Richie.
We literally ran into one another in a line to go to a fraternity, you know, opening or whatever. And we both had our dinks in our pockets. Everybody else had their dinks on. And I said, why don't you put your dink on? He says, why don't you? I said, I'm not going to put this dink on. So then we ended up in art class sitting next to one another. And they bring in a nude model to, we're all supposed to draw the nude model, and the professor's coming around looking at everybody's nude, and I'm drawing the nude like everybody else, and I look over at George's canvas, and he's drawing a movie poster for Ben-Hur.
And Rudy'd look over at me and say, you're doing movie poster. I said, no, there's a nude model. Why don't you do the nude? I said, I'd rather do Yul Brynner, man. His head is nude. So honest to Christ, it was like that. I mean, we just were both blowing it off. I'm still blowing off education. You know, Rudy's got the same sort of irreverent attitude, and we just became great buddies.
So that's how actually we started doing little scripts, and we had a radio show. We made tapes, and we did all kinds of voices, impersonations. Some of them were lousy, but we did them anyway. And we would pull pranks, do that in the cafeteria or on an elevator, and we got arrested because of it. We were doing things like skipping class and abducting the art class to use as extras in movies.
And I actually got to the point of wondering if this couldn't be life, you know, maybe this is real life. And in fact, it was.
We call those the happy days years, where it was 1957, 58, 59 to 60. And we were having a good time. I was running around at night and come back, and George and I were writing little scripts and movies and shooting movies. And go ahead, ask another question.
I wanted to be an actor. How I met George through another friend of ours who is still a friend of ours, Rudy Ritchie. Rudy and I were cast in a play at the Pittsburgh Playhouse. And as I recall, it was No Time for Sergeants. I did a number of plays then, but I think that particular one was No Time for Sergeants. And George came to see the show one night to come to see his friend Rudy Ritchie. And that was the first night that I met George. And I must say that it was a very, very ceremonial meeting, in that George showed up in a cape. He was going through his Jose Ferrer Cyrano de Bergerac period. And he actually showed up in a cape and spouting lines from Cyrano.
So he begins going, "This nose, you see this nose upon my face? It is a nuisance, no?" And I'm just wondering, what is he doing? Well, he was acting. He was showing the actors that he too could act.
That was my first meeting with George. And I got a call, I'm going to say it was a couple of months later. George had cobbled together some money for a project called Expostulations. And he called me and asked me if I would be willing to be in Expostulations as an actor. I thought, well, yes, of course, I'll deign to be in this film production. At that time, I had no idea which end of the camera you even pointed. I went out, did a couple of days of work on Expostulations as an actor, and became absolutely intrigued with the production end of the business. And actually, George and I stuck together from that time on.
I was at WVU for a couple of months, and Rudy Ritchie wrote me a letter, and in the letter he said, "I met a really great guy. We became good friends right away at the campus of Carnegie Tech," and it was George Romero, and he said he draws movie scenes instead of doing what he's supposed to be doing in class, and they're really great drawings, and when you come home you have to meet him. So Christmas vacation, I came home and we jumped into Rudy's '55 Plymouth convertible and went to George's apartment. So George, here we honk the horn, and George comes out and he's in his Viva Zapata stage. When George got into a movie, man, he was really into the movie. So here comes George down the steps with a big sombrero, mustachios, pistol belts, and pistolas. We went to a Dairy Queen to get ice cream, and the girl took one look at him and slammed the window shut. Wouldn't serve us. So, but we thought it was great, you know. We all did crazy things like that.
George and I formed the Latent Image. I think it was actually incorporated in 1961. Basically, he knew and I knew that we wanted to do something in the production business, but we had essentially no experience. It was on-the-job training, if you will, in some ways. Of all of our whole group, George had more technical experience than any of us. Even though it wasn't a lot, he had a lot more than we did.
In those days, there was no such thing as videotape. But cities the size of Pittsburgh had film laboratories that processed and developed and printed film, movie film. The news was on film. And so I sort of traded. I always say it was my first job. It wasn't really a job because I wasn't being paid for it. But I would go and hang out at these labs, and in exchange for having access and for hanging out there, I said, well, I'll bring the newsreels over to the TV stations. And, you know, that's what I did. And so I had this little bit of knowledge, or actually it was a fair amount of knowledge compared to what most people knew about how to do it. So I sort of knew how to do it. I sort of knew how to make a movie. And I was the only guy from among our friends who had that sort of practical knowledge, because in those days, a film appreciation course was all you could take, which meant you watched Battleship Potemkin and talked about it. So it was, all of myself and my friends, we were all sort of self-taught.
When you hit a dry spell, what's the natural way to wet it down?
Honey, how about a beer?
With a tall, cold Duke.
Everything we did, everything that came to be, we learned by doing it. We were sort of this weird little must have been to Pittsburghers. I mean, we called the latent image. Nobody even knew what that was, you know, which the latent image is the image that goes on to film before it's developed.
Yeah, you have to understand, the latent image was less a studio than it was a state of mind. We were all young and very crazy, and a lot of crazy things would go on there.
George came up with this idea, well, if we took a piece of string and we took it out the front window and up over the roof and in the back window and tied it together, we could, in fact, have a game.
And the idea was we'd ring a bell, and then you had a stopwatch, and you'd pull this rag until the rope came all the way down, and thing, and it'd take, you know, 36 seconds. What's the record? You know, and they were doing that. We were doing that instead of editing the Calgon commercial for hours.
Engines reversed full, Captain. We're stuck.
We've got to find out what's on those fibers.
Pittsburgh had about 20 film production companies at the time. Pittsburgh was the third leading corporate headquarters city in America. I don't know where we are now. We're still up there someplace. If you looked in the yellow pages, there were 20 companies, all the way from one-man operations up to larger companies like Modart, which was sort of on top then. But Modart was this stodgy kind of company, old-fashioned. We were like the young guns, bohemians, you know. And people wanted a creative job on very little money. They came to us, always with promises that when we really get some money to work with, we're coming back, you're going to make some money next time, and next time, and next time. But when they got the money, they'd run away to New York or Hollywood so they could brag about being there, you know.
We were always pissed off because the clients, we would finally get a contract with an advertising agency to do a commercial for Iron City Beer. But whenever they wanted to do sort of the big commercial, you know, the big annual commercial, the Christmas commercial, the Super Bowl commercial. Super Bowl commercials weren't that big then, but, you know, the big commercial, they never did it locally. They would always go immediately to New York or LA. And so, you know, we were always pissed off about that, because here's this client that we know well, a friend, and bada boom, and, you know, we never got the big jobs. We did, however, we did very well. We made enough money. We sacrificed. I mean, we weren't getting rich in any way, but, you know, we were making enough money to survive, and we were making movies. They weren't really movies, and we knew that, but they were movies. So basically, over the years, we accumulated some equipment. We got some stability. We had enough money to survive, to eat, pay the light bills and all that, and we said, why don't we try to make a real movie? And that was the idea.
You, drag that out of here and throw it on the fire. Nothing down here? All right, go ahead down and give him a hand. Let's go check out the house. There's something here. I heard a noise.
Vince Stravinsky was such an incredible force and such an incredible human being. Vince worked his ass off. I mean, he did everything from going out to that house and figuring out how to get the pump running and get water running in the house so that we at least had running water, to procuring it. I mean, I think he did the real estate deal for it. He did that deal. Vince was just an amazing, amazing, amazing human being that should be absolutely given as much credit as anyone for the making of Night of the Living Dead.
George and I were basically at that time the two writers, and we each had an office with an editing room in it and a typewriter. So George would be in one room trying to come up with ideas, and I'd be in the other room, and then we'd talk about the stuff and, you know, try to figure out what we were going to do. And I said that whatever we did should start in a cemetery, because people find cemeteries spooky, and I'm thinking about Abbott and Costello, and they're in the cemetery, and the coffin, and the, you know, the candles sliding, and all that kind of stuff. And so I was working on an idea where aliens come to Earth, and they're in search of human flesh, and it was going to start in a cemetery.
So I had written a short story, which I basically had ripped off from a Richard Matheson novel called I Am Legend. And I said, how about this?
But we had a Christmas break, and George went away for 5 or 6 days and came back, and he had like a story that started in a cemetery, and it was basically the opening of what became Night of the Living Dead. You had somebody attacking the girl in the cemetery. You had her running to the car, the keys. You had all, you know, making it to the house, and I think it went all the way up to where Ben shows up. And everybody liked the flow of it, and it had the excitement and the suspense. But George never said who these creatures were. And I said, man, this is great, you know, really. And I said, well, you know, it seems to me they could be dead people. I said, why don't we? He said, oh, that's good. I said, but what are they after? They're attacking, but what, you know, they don't bite anybody. They don't, you know, what do they do other than fight? And he didn't know that either. I said, well, why don't we use my flesh-eating idea? So that's how they became the living dead, after human flesh.
And meantime, we put together 10 of us, 10 friends, and we said, let's kick in $600 a piece. And everybody did. We had 6 Gs, bought some film, rented the farmhouse, found the farmhouse through some real estate agent, and started to shoot.
You know, it was about doing it, and it's sort of like, again, the reverse of Hollywood as we know it today. There's a lot of talk and not much action. You know, this was all, that's why the film got made, and that's why the film got made before there was even really a completed script, as far as I'm concerned. It was an idea, and before the idea went cold, it was much more important to get into production on it. You know, and I mean, that's my gut, and that's my feeling now from what might have happened back then, because we certainly weren't prepared, you know, when we went out to shoot. I mean, far from it.
I don't think any of us knew how to produce a film. I mean, we screwed up left and right, not producing everything in every area. I mean, we were just a bunch of guys trying to make a movie, and we basically passed out titles. There were arguments. It was a very democratic community, and in the beginning there were arguments about who's going to direct, who's going to do this, who's going to do that, who's going to do that. We all thought that we knew how to do each other's job. And we did, basically. Each one of us knew as much as the other guy knew, anyway. And so basically, those jobs were tossed out, you know, okay, you know a little more about this, you know a little more about that. I frankly think that Russ was the best producer, if you want to put it in quotes, because he knew a little bit about business, because we'd been running our company for several years. And he was always the sort of, you know, sane one and all that.
Getting a project financed is always one of the most difficult parts of it. And what we decided to do was, once we made the commitment to do the picture, we had one very, very, very important leg up, and that was our production company, the Latent Image, had 35mm cameras, we had all the audio equipment, we had all the lighting equipment, we had studio space. Although studio space didn't come into play in Night of the Living Dead, the office building where our offices were located in Pittsburgh did come into play. The farmhouse where Night of the Living Dead was its principal location, the basement of that building was too shallow to film in, so we actually recreated, we faked the basement of the house in the basement of our office building in downtown Pittsburgh. Everything else was done at the farmhouse with the exception of the scene that we filmed in Washington, D.C. And the reason that we did that, so with a little bit of creative fudging, we all piled into some cars, drove to Washington, D.C. on a Sunday, had no permits, had no anything. We put military flags on the front of Carl Hardman's Continental automobile to make it look like an official car, we thought. We dressed George as a reporter and a few other of our friends as reporters, and did the scene in Washington, D.C. just to prove that, yeah, we do have some budget connected with this picture. You know, we shot in D.C.
It was basically all instinct. It was basically all, okay, we're going to need, we have to do this posse scene next week. That means we need 40 hamburgers instead of 3. You know, it was basically producing that film was on a quite simplistic level. I'm not degrading what those guys did in that way, but it was quite, you know, we were just a bunch of guys out to make a movie. And if Vince couldn't, you know, run to get the burgers, somebody else would do it. And, you know, it was like that. It was basically, what does it take to get the job done?
Everybody's focus was in the same place. There was never fractionalization of the mission, you know. So that made it quite easy, you know. And there was, and again, because it wasn't a union situation, or it wasn't a situation where, well, I can't touch that or I can't do that. Everybody could do everything, and they were expected to. And it really actually had nothing to do with expectation. It just, again, it was an unwritten thing. You were there because you wanted to be there. You weren't there because you were being paid to be there. You weren't being, you know, you were there because this was your devout conviction of what you wanted to be doing with your life at that moment. And through all those moments, and you know, I mean, yeah, I'm sure I'm glossing over a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm sure there were at least 1 or 2 short tempers, and I'm sure there were a couple of huff-offs and hissy fits, you know. But that's not what I remember. You know, that's not my recollection of it at all. My recollection of it was a lot of laughter, you know, a lot of people having figured out how to do it.
The hardest thing about being the director of Night of the Living Dead, actually during the process of making Night of the Living Dead, the hardest thing was being the director. I was this non-confrontational guy who didn't want to have to hassle with anything. You know, I sort of wanted things to happen. I wanted to, you know, click my ruby slippers and have it happen. The hardest thing was having to sort of grow up and actually say things. Actually having to say, no, put the music box here, not there. I mean, that was the hardest thing. And probably nobody ever even noticed that. I mean, this is really digging deep here. But that was the hardest thing for me, making decisions.
Damn you, down! I was tall and skinny. I was an investor. I was working on the film, and I was available. And I had an old suit, So George says, you really look good as a zombie. You want to do that opening scene? Okay. So I did. At first, since the opening scene was the last scene shot, in the rest of the film, you don't see my walk, because it was not that much there was not that much movement of the zombies. We were like always together. Anytime you saw me separately, I was coming through a window. I was looking, trying to get in the window. The opening scene with me chasing her and at the house before the nightfall, I subconsciously picked that up, I'm pretty sure, from a film with Boris Karloff. And it was the one where he was electrocuted. He was a prisoner, and he got criminal, and he got electrocuted, and he came back to life. And he had one arm that was sort of dangling, and his leg, dragging his leg. I think that's where I got that from subconsciously. We were here in the graveyard shooting that final scene, and they wanted me to pick up a rock and break the window on the car. And I thought this was going to be a pretty easy thing to happen. So we started shooting, and I got the rock and came back to the window and took the first smack. And to my astonishment, it bounced off. So I took the second smack, and once again, to my astonishment, it bounced off. So on the third smack, I really slammed it. And when I did, it flew out of my hand and into the car. And of course, if you can tell by the shot where George was at, laying on the seat with a camera in front of him, the rock hit George and the camera. Luckily, it didn't hurt the camera. Well, guys, it's been 40 years of Night of the Living Dead, and I hope all of you are as proud as I am that we produced a film that will go down in history, and will put our names in history, in the history books. And what else can you say?
We were a production company. We made commercials, industrial films, and we knew all of the people of Image 10 who did the same thing. They made industrial films, video commercials, and we all decided that we should probably make a movie. So we met, and there were 10 of us, so we called ourselves Image 10. We sat down in our conference room and said, well, now what do we do? Well, we should make a horror film, because they're easily sold, they're generally successful, and that's what we did. Lo and behold, ultimately, out came Night of the Living Dead. And because I was the right age, I just became Harry Cooper.
I'm not going to take that kind of a chance when we got a safe place. We luck into a safe place, and you're telling us we got to risk our lives just because somebody might need help, huh?
We all were very much interested in making the scariest horror film we could. We all knew what everyone's talent was, what their specialty was, what our specialty was.
There were no assigned roles in the production work. You know, everybody carried water.
Right.
Because there was no running water to flush the toilet. Everybody ran down to the grocery store to buy bologna to make sandwiches for all of us, and
yeah,
and everybody took care of the camera gear and carried
did
lights
everything.
and yeah. I had done a lot of regional theater, you know, and had always done my own makeup, or somebody else had done it. I really had no business at all doing the ghoul makeup, but I was the only one. I had more experience than some of the others did, and I thought, just logically, if I just take a person's face and exaggerate what they already have, if they have a wide face, make it wider. If they have narrow set eyes, make them narrower. And that was my only basis for doing the black and white ghoul makeup. And if you look at the movie and you see we shot the ghouls sequentially, you'll see that in the beginning everyone looks like a raccoon.
Mm-hmm.
And gradually they got a little more sophisticated. But it's still essentially, it was the black eyes and the sunken cheeks, but then lots of white to emphasize what they already had. I did the nudes makeup too, and that was an experience because I had never done makeup on a nude woman. But I just dusted her down with gray makeup to tone down. She was an art student, and she was very young and healthy, and so I just wanted to make her look kind of gray and dead. And she walked past the camera. There was no frontal shot of her, at least not in the film. And
no, there wasn't any.
No, and that's it. She's just on camera for 2 seconds, but you'll see that on your midnight movies.
It isn't the fuse. The power lines are down. Helen, I have to get that gun.
Haven't you had enough? I'm just enormously flattered that anybody remembers it now, 40 years later. No,
yes.
I still don't really associate with it.
Our view, essentially, is the fact that we were very, very lucky with this film.
Right.
Lack of experience, in a true sense, to be able to make a film that has withstood time. A film 40 years later, which are still being, is still being talked about.
One morning in 1967, I woke up, my mother woke me up, and she said, "Honey, you're gonna flip." And I thought, ugh, what a way to wake up, you know. She's trying to like cajole me into getting up and going to school, like that's gonna work. And I said, why, you know, why am I gonna flip? And she told me, she said, you're gonna be in a movie. And I said, what kind of movie? And then she told me a little bit about it, and my dad came over and he told me more about it. And I was already a horror movie junkie at that point in my life, watching Chiller Theater every Saturday. And I just couldn't believe my good fortune that I was going to get to play like a little monster and kill people. What could be better? As I recall in my scenes, my dad did most of the direction. Maybe because he figured I feared him more than I feared George. I don't know. So, but yeah, he directed me through the trowel scene, and I think George was more involved when I was eating my dad's arm and maybe being thrown on the couch by Dwayne. shooting the scene wasn't nearly as dramatic as watching it. Marilyn was not even in the same room with me at the time. I was I was stabbing into a pillow with the trowel, and my dad just said, just stab into the pillow. The pillow was in the corner on the floor, and so I started stabbing, and there was no sound. You know, they put in the sound later, and I said, well, how many times do you want me to stab this? I hadn't really been given very clear direction. I'll just keep going. Okay, so I just kept stabbing this pillow, and it was really interesting seeing the finished film to see what it turned into, because you know, I had no idea. And then someone was behind me throwing either black paint or chocolate syrup against the wall to make it look like the blood was splattering. It was great. It was really fun. I teach in a middle school, and so my students are 6th and 7th grade, and my girls actually are more interested in the film than the boys are, and I think the boys are more interested in like the really sort of the torture porn films at this point than something that's a classic and more suspenseful. But the girls, the last couple of years, have just been zombie crazy. And it's good to see that girls are becoming more interested in horror, in classic horror particularly. I just do want to add one more thing, actually. Cooper was right.
Remember that.
This is my little firecracker.
Let's go see what it does.
My brother asked me, hey, Reg, can you do some explosives for us? Some gunshots, fiery vehicle? Sure, you know, what New York, what Hollywood can do, I can do, because it's all fireworks. I went out under the porch, my back porch, and I did some experimenting. They blew a hole in the shirt like a bullet hole, and it splattered the blood, and let the blood drip down the shirt. This is exactly what I want, and this is exactly what George is looking for. Throughout the movie, George remarked to me, you know, when you make a charge, it gets off the first time. The first time, every time. I never had to take a second shot from you. Over in Hollywood, when I worked over there, sometimes we had to do 2, 3, 4, 5 shots because they don't work. Hey, boy, it put a smile across me. You know, it's what Hollywood can do, I can do, if not better. When it come to blowing up a truck, I went out to an old abandoned mine, way out in the country. And me and my partner, Tony, we experimented out there until we got just exactly what we wanted. Did it for George. He was very well satisfied. The work that they went through, it was a hell of a struggle. Through the stockholders, all the actors, everyone that participated in. By God, these guys did one heck of a good job.
the lead role of Ben was written colorless. In fact, he was written a bit as a bit of an asshole. He was meant to be a truck driver who was just angry.
Our friend Rudy Ritchie was originally supposed to play the character of Ben. He was close by, he was accessible, he was all the things that our low-budget film needed. Until a mutual friend of ours, Betty Ellen Haughey, introduced us to an actor friend of hers from New York who happened to be in Pittsburgh visiting his family over Easter in 1967, and that person was Duane Jones.
Duane turned out to be the best actor from among our friends, and so we said, okay, Duane, you got it. And we thought we were being very hip in not changing the script because he was a black man. We thought, cool, man, we ain't going to change nothing. We're not going to do a thing. Let's just play it the way it was and leave it, let it lay. You know, this is this 60s thing coming through. Duane was the only guy who said, I think you're missing a bet here. I mean, Duane actually thought we should take note of it. And in later years, and now particularly, I think we probably should have. Not to make it a big point, but to refer to it at least. Because the anger of this guy, I mean, to put it in very simplistic terms, I think that a person in a minority, any minority, sees a lot of things way more clearly than people in the majority. Most things. But anger gets in the way. And we had written this guy as angry for no reason at all. But if you track the logic of the story, that rage that comes up, automatic rage that comes out, that would have been an interesting overlay. I'm saying again, not hit it hard, but that would have been an interesting overlay on it. And Duane knew this. He was the only guy that knew it. And we're going, no, man, I mean, you know, this is like, we want this to be completely, you know, forget about it. The best way to do this is not comment on it at all. And Duane said, yeah, but you're asking me to slug a white woman. You know what's going to happen to me out on the street if this movie gets in the theater? He was completely sensitive to it all. And we weren't. We're white guys, thinking we're being cool, but yet being insensitive to the you know, the real root of the problem.
I looked back at the diner to see if there was anyone there who could help me. It was when I noticed that the entire place had been encircled.
Duane Jones, I adored him. I really, really, truly did. And my website is actually dedicated to him. Duane was quiet, and I felt safe with him. I didn't feel like, you know, he was just a goofy actor, that there was more substance to him, and I felt very, very comfortable with him.
He was an erudite man who taught at Vassar, and a good actor, very good actor.
I could use some help up here.
That's the cellar. It's the safest place.
You mean you didn't hear the racket we were making up here?
He was very sensitive, very intelligent, very widely read. Between takes, you'd find Duane buried in a book. No superficial stuff, you know, deep philosophy or psychology or, you know, James Joyce, whatever. That was Duane.
If you're stupid enough to go die in that trap, that's your business. However, I am not stupid enough to follow you.
You know, there's so much to say about Duane that it's hard to bring it down to a couple of lines. He was a tortured individual. There was a whole lot of the black-white problem that he carried on his shoulders.
Well, I wish Duane was still alive, because he would be the guy that I would most want to talk to about, you know, how do you feel about this, that this is happening? or that this film has become important in a certain sense. And I don't know, I think Dwayne would probably shrug and say, you know, que va, who knew? I think he would have chuckled. I think he would have laughed with us all.
He was a fine human being. Sorry, I choke up when I think about Dwayne, because he was my friend. And I think he got a rotten deal in life.
I'm glad that he did this picture and that he has that legacy.
Yes, well deserved. Very well deserved.
There was a wonderful feeling of camaraderie and good humor and goodwill. They were wonderful folks to work for. They really were.
I lived here all my life. I married my husband. We built this home here and had our cabinet shop. And after we were done working one Saturday afternoon, we were sitting in the yard. People drove up and they said to us, "Hi, would you like to be in our movie?" Of course, my husband said no, but I said, "Yeah, that would be fun." So we went back and they said, "Come on in, we'll put some makeup on you," and we ended up to be ghouls in the Night of the Living Dead. Whenever I say, "Oh, you know the Night of the Living Dead? I was in that." "Yeah, sure, you know." I don't believe you. But after they find out, and I tell them all that they're lucky to be around a movie star, aren't they? Well, I can hardly believe that it's been 40 years has gone by already. But I'm sure that there's a lot of people that realize that it's been 40 years. But you wouldn't believe how many people stop here at my house and ask me where this movie was made. And I tell them, that I was in it and everything, and we have lots of fun about it. I didn't make much money, but I've had $1 million worth of fun out of this movie.
Welcome to a night of total terror. Night of the Living Dead.
We finished the movie and throw it in the trunk of a car and driving it to New York. We finished it at the same lab where I first learned with the guys over the glue pots how to make movies. And the movie's finished, completely finished, with titles on it, everything else. And so Russ and I take off to drive it to New York. We throw the print in the trunk of the car and we're driving to New York. And we hear on the radio that Martin Luther King had been shot.
So here we are at night driving with our print of Night of the Living Dead in the back seat. Here we have our first finished movie. We have a black man in the lead. We have a posse hunting him down and inadvertently killing our hero. And Martin Luther King has been assassinated. To say the least, it was a bit of a down moment. There wasn't much joking going on for the remainder of that drive to New York.
Now we're in New York. We're going to show the movie to Columbia. We're going to show it to Bada-Boom, Bada-Boom. We had several appointments, and Russ and I went with my cousin to go see 2001. And it was basically forgotten. Now it was just a movie again. It was just in that heightened moment when we heard the news. And we reacted, frankly, poorly to it, thinking this might benefit us. But it was gone then. I mean, then we never thought of it again. And no one who looked at the movie, no distributor, no Columbia, nobody who looked at the movie ever caught on to it. Ever said, wow, you know, nobody wanted to exploit it. Nobody ever saw it because nobody looks at a horror movie with political eyes. And okay, fine. So Columbia says, whoa, this is pretty cool. You know, let us hang on to it for a couple of weeks. So we did. And eventually they called back and said, well, it's really good. We'd like you to change the ending and not shoot the guy.
If you tampered with that part of the story, you wouldn't have Night of the Living Dead. You would have a very different... If it was a Hollywood ending and the hero rode over the hill into the sunset being saved by the sheriff rather than being killed by the sheriff, you would have a different movie.
And so we boldly said, you know, I think, you know, this is our first shot at this, and we said, you know, we didn't know how hard it actually was to get something released. We said, no fucking way, the guy has to die. It's the irony, it's the whole thing. Again, nothing to do with race. If the guy was white, he still would have to die because he made a mistake. He made the wrong choice. He should die for it. Okay, so Columbia says, all right, blows us off. Several other people, AIP, all these other companies look at it. Nobody wants it. So we drive home again, and somebody suggests get a sales agent. So we did. Several weeks later, he calls up and says, I got a distributor that's interested. Walter Reed. And our first reaction is, they want to change the ending? No, no, they'll take it as is. Our friends in Pittsburgh, they didn't know what to think. I mean, basically, I think most of the people that we all knew, I mean, I'm speaking for all of us now, you know, thought, what the fuck are you doing here?
A lot of people, most everyone said, good luck.
We thought it was bad.
Yeah, we thought it was bad. I looked at my acting in the film and I thought, oh my God, I was awful. And I still think I was, although not as much as before, because people like it. They still like it.
We just couldn't be objective. We couldn't be objective about our own performances or anyone else's, or about the horror of the film.
The most profound reaction was from my grandmother on my father's side. She knew we were working on a movie. She had no idea about what it was about and so forth. When we had the premiere screening of Night of the Living Dead, she was in the audience seeing it with a whole audience full of people at the same time. And the cemetery scene comes on, we go through it, I get into the fight with the cemetery zombie, and when the fight started, she got really tense. She got more tense when he knocked my glasses off. She shouted, Russell, he broke your glasses. And then, when I hit my head on the tombstone, I think that was about it for her. I don't know if she could even tell you one thing that happened in that movie after that, after her Russell got his head hit on the tombstone. And it was so real and so genuine that she just couldn't help herself. Here's her grandson, her first grandson. Oh my God! Now his glasses are broken and he's dead within 2 minutes. It doesn't compute for a grandmother.
You know this area. You from around here?
Judy and I are both from around here.
We were on our way up to the lake to go swimming.
Keith was a guy, he was the go-go dancer, you know. Keith was this cat that I thought, of all the people in the cast, I thought he was the celebrity. I mean, he was the cat. He had a gig, he was a go-go dancer, you know, he was happening cat, and, you know, cool. He'd come in, you know, on the, in a convertible, sitting on the, you know, sitting on the back seat of the hood going, hey, yo, yo. I mean, he was the showbiz cat. He was the cat who was most showbiz of anyone in the cast. He was Frankie Avalon. I mean, he was the cat. And he was the young guy that we thought was, you know, we got our Frankie Avalon, man, ain't he cool? You know, he would blow in and out. I mean, of all the people that made the movie, he was the least involved because he had a career. None of the rest of us had a career in doing anything. And he was the cat that had a career. So he was sort of the hero, the showbiz cat. And they'd drive him in, he'd be sitting on the back of a convertible, and he'd be going, hey. And, you know, we were all sort of a bit in awe of him.
Well, I got to tell you that I have not been in this building, which is right around the corner here. I've not been in this building since I believe it was 1970. Well, it actually looks pretty much the same way.
Yeah, the front of the building hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed at all. Ken Goldsmith is still the fellow who owns the building. Yeah. That's our old landlord. Why don't we go in and reintroduce ourselves?
Let's check it out.
You know, it's a funny thing. You buy a cat and you're trying to figure out what to call it. And it's hard to find what to call it. And so, okay, we're going to make a movie. What are we going to call it? That's even harder than when you have a cat, because at least a cat has a certain personality, a certain color or whatever. We didn't know what to call it. So I came up with this really sort of snooty title. Night of Anubis. Anubis being the Egyptian god of the dead, one of the Egyptian gods that guards the dead. And everybody said, what's that? So, okay, forget it.
Oh man, I'm scared to come down here, Russ. What if that little girl with that trowel's down here, man? She might pounce on us.
Don't worry about it, man. Don't you know the basement is the safest place?
Oh yeah, I don't know. When Ben came back up these stairs, you know what happened to him.
It was not a good day for Ben.
Bullet in the brain.
Whoa, man.
Holy cow.
Holy.
It looks a lot the same. Jumped up a little.
I don't remember who suggested it, but we came up with Night of the Flesh Eaters. And that was our title. And that was the title that went all the way through the rest of the film. What happened was there was a film that had been released within recent years, which was called The Flesh Eaters. And so when we got a distributor, Walter Reed, they said, wait a minute, this is, you know, we can't do this because there was this movie, The Flesh Eaters, so we can't use The Flesh Eaters. So we need another title. So they came up with the title Night of the Living Dead, which was not our title, it was Walter Reed's. We liked it a lot immediately, and so we said, yeah. But when they took it off, we were, again, these amateur filmmakers, we had put our little copyright notice, the C with the circle around it, on the title, on Night of the Flesh Eaters, C with the copyright. We should have put the copyright notice at the end of the film, which is where it belongs.
Does this over here, is that where the film storage room was over here?
Yep, we're headed toward it right now.
I used to keep Night of the Living Dead elements and all the elements for our commercial films. And
yep, this was the storage area.
Image presentation film.
Oh man.
Jeez, the film racks are still here.
Look at this. You know, Jack, of all of the recollections, this could possibly be the saddest one.
Yeah.
This is the room where film elements were stored, the film elements that weren't stored in the lab vault. But press kits, prints of the movie, outtakes, trims,
And
all
not only
lost.
that, but like the latent image presentation film that was so great that you guys made while I was still in the Army.
Wow.
That was a fantastic film.
This is where this is the room where George Romero, myself, and the rest of us who killed ourselves for years making films, priceless films, that if anybody could uncover copies of those now, it would be absolutely priceless. And for George and myself as well, was all stored here, and a flood came through and just took it all away. Ruined, absolutely everything ruined.
When they changed the title to Night of the Living Dead, they took off Night of the Flesh Eaters. In taking that off, they took off the copyright. And when they put on Night of the Living Dead, they didn't reinstate a copyright because they didn't, you know, nobody noticed that the copyright notice had come off. And so, I don't know, 3 or 4 years into the film's release, you know, a lot of people noticed that the film had no copyright on it. And it remains to this day in public domain.
On one more sad note, while we're in this room, I can't help but mention the fact that this is where the print of Flesh Eaters was stored, and that this is where the copyright notice got flushed away.
Lost.
And if that hasn't
caused us
created
40 years of grief.
Absolutely right.
Mm-hmm.
But hey, we're going to get it worked out one of these days. So I absolutely maintain, because of script registrations and other items that have Night of the Living Dead copyright on them, the copyright issue for me will never be closed. I will always have a dispute with the Copyright Office, and one of these days we hope to fully have the copyright restored to Night of the Living Dead.
Chief, if I were surrounded by 6 or 8 of these things, would I stand a chance with them?
Well, there's no problem. If you had a gun, shoot them in the head. That's a sure way to kill them. If you don't, get yourself a club or a torch. Beat them or burn them. They go up pretty easy.
When we started 40 years ago, the posse members came from 3 different directions. We crossed this bridge for the police force and for some of the on-foot members. And on the other side of the bridge, there's a road off to the left where the canine units came in. We're going to see that in a few minutes. And then from the other side, a busload of more posse members. And Bill Cardill and Dennis James, I believe it was, landed a helicopter nearby, came over and started interviewing me.
Are they slow-moving, Chief?
Yeah, they're dead. They're all messed up.
And I believe that's the actual house that was there. I believe that's the actual house that was there when we started, when the trucks were here and the dogs were getting out and everything. That's the actual house.
Hey, Vince, Al, you want to get about 4 or 5 men and a couple dogs? There's a house over here behind those trees. We want to go check it out.
And this is 40 years later. I'm amazed at the impact we must have had on society. I believe we stood the test of time, and we influenced a few things in the motion picture business.
Somebody had a cookout here, Vince.
Yeah, sure looks like it, Cal.
And just like this weapon, this is an excellent piece, and it's timeless, and it's an excellent way to end things.
All right, Vince, hit him in the head, right between the eyes. Good shot. Okay, he's dead. Let's go get him. That's another one for the fire.
first time I saw Night of the Living Dead, at 13, I don't think I slept for about a week. I think I was so terrified that I was seeing zombies everywhere, or more specifically, I was seeing safety avenues for zombies. Night of the Living Dead for me wasn't just about horror, it also was about empowerment, because you could stop them, you could shoot them in the head. So at least there was hope. I realized, well, if zombies were attacking me, I could hit them in the head with a brick.
I'll never forget, just even watching the movie again recently, you get to the point where you're watching the film and it sort of starts with this kind of lighthearted attitude and you know, Russ doing his "they're coming to get you, Barbara" and stuff. But as the movie progresses, it gets more and more intense, and all of a sudden, when the gas tank explodes, and the zombies start eating the remains in the truck, it goes from sort of a kind of a safe, not really threatening horror movie to a movie that's taking you somewhere you've never been before.
As long as there's people out there who have a way to watch movies, as long as there's any chance of any culture to be had by going into a theater with, you know, sitting with strangers, or even in the comfort of your own home, if there's a single way to watch a movie, Night of the Living Dead will be there. It's a classic. It always will be a classic, and it's probably going to be part of our history as a culture, as a society, and of course from a filmmaking standpoint.
I think that the low budget of it really lent to the whole quality of it, because, you know, up to then, you know, most of the, you know, feature films that you see are horror are, you know, relatively high budget, high values, and this was kind of a departure from that. And that it was almost that kind of cinema verite, almost like we're following as it's happening. That kind of, you know, what War of the Worlds tried to do on the radio. You know, it's this, you know, documentary kind of thing, and it kind of almost, it felt like it was mirroring that kind of thing, only in cinema.
I remember hearing about it. I went down to New York City. I met some friends. We went to the Coronet Theater. Maybe it was a midnight showing. I was slightly stoned, and it couldn't have been a more perfect time to see that movie. I had anticipation. I was in the right frame of mind, so to speak. I was with my friends. It was a midnight showing, and I was completely open to the experience. I completely absorbed the experience, and it really blew my mind. It was fantastic. I just loved it. It was a life-changing experience.
To all my little zombies out there, I'm so proud of you. Every time a part falls off your face and lands in the dirt, I'm there with you. All right? And George, just keep making them. You make them, I'll watch them. I'll be in one. Call me. I'll be in Rock of the Dead, or wherever, however you want to do it. 40th anniversary. Way to go.
I think probably Night of the Living Dead is the scariest of all the films I've ever made, because partly what we were trying to do was scare you. Since then, I haven't tried to scare, and I don't think any of my other films are scary. I laugh at them. Again, I grew up on EC comic books where I laughed and giggled at the gore, and, you know, expected things to turn bad and be terrible. And so it's very hard for me to even perceive what is going to scare people.
A question that people sometimes ask me, well, did you know when you were working on this picture that it was going to become a classic, that so many years after the fact that people would still be looking at it, talking about it, wanting to ask questions about it? The answer to that question is absolutely not. What we did was to tell the best story that we were capable of telling on film. The fans made it a classic. We made a good film. The fans made it a classic.